Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in our interview series for harnessing emotional intelligence as leaders that we are. I decided to put this program together to interview and research leaders in the field of youth development to understand how they overcame challenges and build their own emotional intelligence to support the work that they're doing. And in today's time, I have to say, I really feel strongly about us continuing to have dialogue, real talk about what's going on, what needs to happen in order for us to overcome whatever challenges are ahead of us. And here I have today Dr. Danielle Cox, who is an amazing leader for the last 20 years in the nonprofit field, really working hard to really develop foundation for our youth, not only from middle school all the way up to college, and through her position as a CEO at Oliver Scholar, which is an educational and development organization in New York City. I am so excited about the work that she does. I'm excited about her growth. I've watched her from the moment that she did her TED Talk as the forgotten middle. And we know that over 2 million people have already watched, download this TED Talk. It's a must watch because it's still very relevant to today. Now, and on top of her being on the board, um, as a secretary for Everyday Democracy, an organization devoted to democracy and civic engagement. She is also a board chair of the New York Women's Foundation. I don't know, I don't understand, Danielle, how you get all of this done and still are able to
Don't
so
either.
fit as you are. But I also know that you and I grew up in the same hood.
Yep.
We grew up in the same neighborhood with very similar family dynamics, and we have the same mentor, which I want to give a shout out to
Eileen O'Connor,
Eileen
who winds up
O'Connor.
YMCA.
Yes, yes, and she was my first supervisor, boss, or actually, she was my counselor before I got hired by the Y. So she was my first youth development person, professional who guided me. And I'm like, I'm sticking with her for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the invitation
Yeah.
and the opportunity to once again be in community with you. Um, you have worked with my team at our most recent retreat, and so I know firsthand the breadth of your expertise and commitment to youth development. And I'm so glad we were able to tap into that to help further along the goals of our organization.
It is awesome to be here with you because we've had some conversations offline, and we know that in order to really make a strong foundation with our children, with our young people, we need to develop our staff and we need to develop ourselves. So I want to first ask, what inspired you to be in the field of youth development? Why?
Such a good question. Well, first of all, um, I found my way to youth development strangely by accident. Um, I grew up on the Upper West Side like you, and so I was, a part of the Uptown Y when there was an Uptown Y on 100th Street and Broadway. Um, I also did day camps and sleepaway camps and other activities through Goddard Riverside, which is also on the Upper West Side, Settlement House on Columbus Avenue. And there were always these amazing adults who were like pouring into the young people, but I didn't really understand that as a career pathway.
Mhm.
And so as a college student, I really thought that I would go on to become a Black Studies professor.
Okay.
I double majored in English and history with a concentration in Black Studies. Um, but took a job in investment banking after college. My cousin was working at a firm. They had some opportunities in the back office. And I would say I made it about 10 months. And I was like, Mom, this is not it.
Mhm.
And so, she made it possible for me to quit my job. And but then I was like sitting on the couch a little bit too long. And she said, well, why don't you take a teaching job? Um, and until you figure things out, right? And so at the very last minute in like August of that year, maybe August 1991, I'm dating myself. Um, I was hired as a first-time teacher at a parochial school in the Bronx on the concourse. Um, and I remember saying to my principal, um, she seemed very distracted during the interview. She was like not really looking at me, listening. And so I later said to her, like, I did not think you were going to hire me because you didn't seem that engaged during the interview. And she said, that's because I had already decided to hire you in the first 10 minutes. But I had all these, questions that I was supposed to ask you.
Mhm.
And so she was also a tremendous mentor and leader. So shout out to Yvette Tinnerman, George Tinnerman. Um,
And we should be shouting out to our
yeah,
mentors that brought us
absolutely.
up. Yes.
Um, I watched her really do the work, right? So she was the first one at the school building in the morning. Um, she was the last to leave at night. Um, and that's not to glorify overwork. It's really to talk about what it means for people to move in their purpose.
Yes.
And she was absolutely kind of living and moving in her purpose, right? She wasn't being held there against her will.
Mhm.
Um, that the job didn't define her purpose, but the job was a vehicle for her to live in her purpose. And so that was the example that she set. And then, of course, at the end of the my first year of teaching, um, and I had been helping the principal with different projects and stuff like that. I was young. I didn't have any family responsibilities at that time. Um, our assistant principal stopped coming to work, and we never heard from her again. And
Okay.
so my principal had this crazy idea, like, you have all these writing skills and communication skills, um, and this is work that, seems to come natural to you. And so she made me the assistant principal. And you can imagine that was not
Story.
early. I was 23, right? You can imagine that didn't make her the most popular person in the building. Um,
Not you either, this young kid. What she got to teach me?
exactly. But I got a chance to kind of like work on our high school counseling stuff, and just put some structures in place that maybe hadn't been there. It's a small parochial school serving the local community. Um, and there was a teacher, a third grade teacher, Miss Martin, who's no longer with us, but shout out to Miss Martin, uh, who came to me when I was leaving, to say, when she made the announcement, I went to her after that staff meeting and I said, you just killed your career. I think this is the worst decision you've made as our principal. And she said, I am telling you that because I want you to know, A, that I said it, and B, that I was wrong. Um, and so, like, to even have someone who initially doubted me, and had been teaching for like 30 years to say that, the resources that I tried to pour into the teachers, the recognition strategies that I tried to implement in partnership with the principal, had made her work easier, um, was so valuable to me, right? And it reinforced this notion. And let me just backtrack, right? My mother worked in corporate for 20 years. She got her master's degree in 1971. Like, how many women, period, had a master's degree in 1971? And certainly as a Black woman
Yeah.
in a management role in a corporation, um, she was, a pioneer in many ways. But I listened to my mom, and I used to go to work with my mom, right, and see how she led and how she operated in that space.
Yeah.
The compassion that she extended to her staff, the ways that she tried to insulate her team from the visceral racism of others in higher management. Sometimes, using herself as a shield
Yes.
um, to make sure that the people who were actually driving results were taken care of. Um, so I don't want to shortchange that model. I loved going to work with my mom. I felt very proud that she was in a management role. And I loved the camaraderie and interaction that came with accountability, right?
Yes.
But that
Yes.
was led by compassion.
And it reminds me of that in order for us to learn ourselves, we need these role models in our lives. We need to see how they navigate their world, and watch them go through their challenges. And then we watch them, and there's a power, and when you speak about your mom, that I feel there's like a poise and a empowerment that she walked through her world, and that's a great vision to see live in your life. So congratulations, and that's why I want to have this talk, because you are that vision for many young people, many aspiring leaders that are out there.
Mhm. And
So
and I would say even going back to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she passed away when I was 8 years old. But one of our family friends said to me, your grandmother worked in the dean's office at Hunter College in the 40s. The rest of the ladies on the block were mostly housewives,
yeah,
some doing domestic work. Um, but to see your grandmother get up every day in her suit and strut down that street on her way to Hunter College, one woman said, that's why I ended up continuing my education
wonderful.
and getting a job, just that model. So my mother also kind of had that model. But it's also, I want to, name that, America has a leadership archetype.
Mhm,
I was saying this to someone yesterday that is white, that is male, that is brash,
mhm.
um, that is not compassionate, that is not kind of intuitive or emotionally intelligent. To kind of bring it back to the point. Um, and I was saying to someone yesterday, just think about the cartoons that we all grew up watching, right? Fred Flintstone's boss was a tyrant, right? Mr. Crab on SpongeBob was a tyrant.
Yeah,
Um, you know, uh, we had lots of cultural examples of white men who were able to uh, drive results using oftentimes fear and bully tactics, right? Um, Even, The Devil Wears Prada.
yes,
So you finally have a woman who's in charge, right? But she's following an
it's
American
probably,
archetype of leadership.
yeah,
And so I am thankful that I had so many examples of "Hmm, we can lead and be effective and not do it in that way
yeah.
um, to kind of follow. Because let's face it, um, my doctorate is in organization and leadership.
Mhm.
I read zero books on leadership by women as part of my
Mm,
formal
mhm.
leadership education. Um, and so people will say, oh, I had Latinx boss or a black boss or a female boss or an LGBT boss. And they were just as bad, if not worse, as my white bosses. And I said, and the challenge is we all are learning from the same playbook,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so they got the same training. They were acculturated in the same ways as everyone else. So why would we, without some sort of intention, expect something different from people until they reach a certain level of consciousness to think about, connecting their leadership to their humanity, right? Um, I think when you live your life in alignment, you don't have to invent multiple versions of yourself. So I am human in this exchange. I am human with my staff. I am human with young people. I am human with my family. Um, and living an authentic life means that you're not building a sense of identity on a pretend version of yourself, which, by the way, takes a lot of energy.
It takes a
It's
lot of
very
energy
draining, very draining. You
and
get to
confusion. It
be
confuses you.
right. You get to live with your values in every space that you occupy. And so that's kind of what this sector has allowed me to do. So I left the school in the Bronx. Um, by that time, I had started my course of study at Teachers College in educational administration, and I thought I was okay. Now I know I want to be a principal. Um, and so initially I wasn't working. And then I'm walking in the hall, the basement hallway of Grace Dodge Hall, which is kind of dim. You can kind of smell pool water down there. Um, but there was like a jobs bulletin. So I said, let me see what's going on here. And I knew that I didn't want to work for the DOE. Um, I wasn't hearing great things about the experience from the people that I knew who had gone to the DOE, just in terms of, working within a bureaucracy, not having the kind of curricular freedom that I had in a parochial school. Um, and so there was a job advertised working in public schools, but not for public schools as part of a nonprofit organization.
Yes.
And so that took me to, you know, Brooklyn.
Okay.
I had not spent a lot of time in my life in Brooklyn because I'm an Upper West Side girl. Um, but I got placed at this school in the heart of Brooklyn, District 13. And there was a new superintendent. Shout out to now Chancellor Dr. Lester Young, who was really excited about the ways in which he was going to be able to leverage community-based organizations to add capacity and value to the experiences for their kids. Um, and so yeah, I got to work in a school. I got to like talk to the teachers and hear what their challenges were, but also, right, my primary responsibility was to inspire these kids to kind of like keep going. And I had kids in that program who were doing seventh grade for the third time, right? I had kids in that program, they would come to me and say, Mr. So-and-so, our math teacher is, he moves ahead when we have already said to him we don't understand the content that well. We haven't mastered it. Um, so I asked Mr., XYZ for lunch, uh, and he said, you don't know about the pacing calendar. And I said, what's a pacing calendar? And he said, I have to be talking about whatever is on this calendar when I get an observation. So I don't even have the flexibility as a teacher to say, you know what, let's spend a little more time on integers until you guys get it.
Mhm.
I am obligated to move ahead, whether or not the kids have mastered the material.
Wow.
Imagine my frustration as a teacher because I can see that they need more time with some concepts, and I don't have the power or control to be able to do that without jeopardizing my job. Um, and so that, having that balanced perspective about what um, schools and adults who really do care about young people
Mhm.
are faced with in a school where, they couldn't find a certified science teacher, right? They had no science textbooks. There was no lab opportunity, and then we want to look at these kids and say, why can't you compete? Right? When the divide in terms of resources and just access to basic tools and information was so limited. So I think that was the role that kind of got me saying, okay, youth development is my jam, right? Because I
Yeah.
can work in partnership with schools um, in service to community, but with a little more flexibility and input into what that strategy needs to look like.
And that's the power of youth development is the innovation, the flexibility that we have and how we're teaching, not so much what we're teaching, but how we're teaching allows us to be, you know, um, mobile and how you call it, just redesign a program that fits where the students are now. And a big question that just came up for me, and I think I'm going off script, but there's no lie. We are in a time in this world today, in our country, where we are being baffled about what's going on. And we're going to see a lot of impact, and you're experiencing a lot of impact with our young people. And we're going to be having to be somebody else. Like, what leadership do we need to become? Who do we need to become to overcome these challenges that we are potentially, we have no, which is scary, right? So how do we transform ourselves to overcome these challenges that are ahead of us?
So I would say I'm not going to become somebody different.
Mhm.
I think the best thing we can do in this moment, um, especially for those of us who are already in the trenches,
Right.
I always find it fascinating when, uh, you'll hear in legacy media, what are Black people doing for Black people? What are Latinx people doing for Latinx people? It's like, bruh, we are not waiting for y'all.
Mhm.
Like there's a whole sector, there's a whole community um, that does this work every day, day in
Mhm.
and out, without your money, without your consent, without your input, without your approval, without your permission. Um, and we have been doing that continuously. So I think the first thing we have to remember is if you are already engaged in addressing social disparities, we need you to be more of who you already are
Mhm. Mhm.
and to do that bravely and with courage.
Yes.
Um, you know, I said to someone yesterday, we we're in an era where people have grown up being told, you know, the one thing you don't talk about, two things you don't talk about is money and politics,
Mhm.
right? What part of your life is not political?
Yes.
Where you live, what you can eat, the doctor that you go to, um, the schools that you attend and what you have access to in those schools, whether or not your streets get cleaned. Um, there, it's bizarre, right? That the thing that shapes almost every facet of our existence is one of the things we've been told not to discuss. Um, and so I think getting comfortable with conflict uh, and seeing conflict as an opportunity, not an opportunity to indict, is so important. Um, and also,
And 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 also go ahead because I really want to speak to the opportunity piece because we see that it's coming, it's already here. So let's stop focusing on them and focus on us and what we are up to. And that's what I'm hearing you say is we're already doing it. Let's keep doing what we've been doing
let's
because
keep
we
doing
know
it,
how to
but
do it.
let's enroll others,
Yes.
right? Who maybe, you know, you can say, like, I love dogs and I care about what happens to dogs and never do anything about it, right?
Yes.
And so if those are your values, go commit to like 5 hours a month at the local animal shelter. Like, this is the time to volunteer. This is the
Take
time to get
action.
plugged in. This is the time to say, I'm going to sacrifice 3 lattes a month, right? And become a recurring donor to an organization that is doing powerful work that has meaning for me. If you're in a corporate space and you're challenged with kind of the direction of DEI, um, are you volunteering? Are you putting your money, your
Mhm.
resources, your ingenuity, your skills, where your mouth is, right?
Yes.
I think the thing that I love about the work that I do is, um, I'm a spiritual person, I'm a Christian person, right? So if I say to God, um, I love young people and I care about what happens to them, and He says, show me where in your life you are demonstrating that value,
Yes.
you know. I
Yes.
feel like I'm positioning myself to have an answer to that question when it's my time to answer. Um, and so if you care about equality, if you care about, you know, the high rates of suicide and homelessness among LGBTQIA young people, um, what are you doing? How would I know that that's something you care about by a choice that you're making in your life? Um, so that's the first thing I think people need to understand. The other thing that people need to understand is, I think back to aging myself, the legacy of someone like Muhammad Ali. Like,
Yes.
I don't believe in this. And so I'm willing to make a sacrifice
Yes.
because that's not who I am. And you're not going to do it. There's nothing you can do to me or say about me that will take me out of my character and convince me that it's okay to live in conflict with my values. Um, but what we also remember from him um, is the way he used his words, right? And so part of what we're seeing, right, this is a strategy to disarm you, to
Yes.
disrupt your nervous system, right? To
They
make you
need
feel
you.
like you don't have options, which is why it's so important, like to pick three issues, right? Um, uh, and be willing to follow, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that makes me a good leader is my willingness and availability to be a follower. You know, I've been toying around with this idea like somebody needs to write a book on fellowship.
Right. Right. Because how do you know how to lead if you don't know who do you want to follow? Who do
Right.
you want to follow? Who's
I
inspiring you?
am not an immigration law expert.
Right.
So I am available to take direction from
Yes.
and listen to and benefit from the expertise of people who do know something about
Yes.
what they're talking about. Everybody is not an expert in everything. You know, I said to my staff at a convening yesterday, yes, I'm a nonprofit generalist, but I don't know everything. I don't always have the best answer, right? It's not my job to be the voice of God who knows everything and does everything the best. It's my job to identify talent to
Yes.
make sure that when it comes to these young people we're serving, and we are serving them at Oliver Scholars, the person who is delivering the service knows what they're doing
Yes.
and feel supported and emboldened and empowered to enact the best ideas. Um, and so, so I think that's also really important. Um, and we're not going to, I don't have the capacity to do everything, but I do have the capacity to do something. And so in this moment, I care about Black women,
Yeah.
right? So I'm a ride for us. I care about young people, regardless of their backgrounds. So
Mhm.
I'm going to ride for them. I care about the importance of education. That's something that I do know something about. And so I'm going to ride for them, right? I do know something about this sector, but I'm also really good at partnering with and talking to people like you and sharing ideas and holding space for each other because we understand this is hard. And so that's something that I can do. So do what you can, but do something.
Right.
Don't
Be in
just sit on
action.
Facebook and pontificate, you know. Give those Twitter fingers a break and come offline and get in the trenches, right? If
And
you are too busy,
victimizing is what their goal is. They're looking at victimizing us, making sure that we're dumbed down, making sure that we're not um, don't have the strength, we're fearful, we're afraid. So it's our job to be empowered, to be in action regardless.
And the other thing I'm saying is like read.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It's been years since I took American history classes, right? Revisit the Constitution. Like
Hmm.
we have YouTube, we have
Yes.
libraries. Hit that library, start a book club so that when you do open your mouth, you know what you're talking about. Because listen, I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, right? I think about this Black woman with a limited education, living in, you know, deep poverty in the South, um, as a sharecropper, um, being jailed and beaten with a blackjack in the middle of the night, and getting Black people to do that beating while white people watched to make sure that there was damage to the community, right? And she still came out and showed up at the Democratic National Convention and wanted to be seen and wanted to be heard, right? This is not the worst that we have seen, particularly as Black Americans in this country, right? It might be the worst moment for me personally, but as a people, this is not the worst that we've seen. And so I'm calling this our period of deconstruction. Sorry about that, right? Um, and what comes out on the other side is up to all of us. Because let's be real, we were half-assing democracy. Um, a civil rights lawyer said in a conversation I was a part of, affirmative action was the floor and not the ceiling of what this country could have done to really bring about equity.
It, it was the minimum,
It was the minimum.
the
Those were
least
the
they could have done.
crumbs. That's the least they could do,
Crumbs, the
right?
least they could have
And
done.
so what we are, and I'm going to say this for the white liberals, right, who we've uh, had to contend with even in nonprofit and philanthropic spaces, right? It's like I don't want to go to your website and see all these little Black and brown kids, you know, as the recipients of whatever blessing you think that you're delivering. And then I go to your staff list and your board list, and everybody is white, right? We are not where we want to be, but certainly in terms of educational gains, we have come a long way from there is no excuse, there is no reason, there is no explanation not to be sharing power in spaces that pretend that they are promoting the principles of equality and justice and inclusion, right? So stop telling me, show me.
Yeah.
And so is this whole thing on the verge of collapse? I don't know. Maybe it will be. Maybe somebody in government is going to find their courage um, and restore the balance of power. But if they don't, right, we have an obligation to already be thinking about how will we do this differently? What are the fail safes that we need to ensure are um, unbreakable? How do we need to educate all of our kids? I think it's Carter G. Woodson wrote the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Guess what? This is the miseducation of America. And that was a strategy too, right? To make sure that white kids living in rural communities with limited resources and access have their resentment trained on people who are just as powerless as they are. There's a reason. If you ever have the opportunity to do the Undoing Racism training from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, they walk you through the legal history of everything this country has done since the 1600s to make sure that there was never an alliance between poor whites and Black folks. And they made it illegal for those groups that had so much in common, that had so much to offer each other and gain from collaboration, um, were legally bound not to come together, right? The system is doing what we designed it to do, and what we were willing to tolerate. Um, and so I would say this, if we were not experiencing this moment, we would have, we could have done this for another 200 years, actually.
Exactly. We keep doing what we've been
Tolerance
doing,
level,
expecting different results.
and, and generating think pieces and
Yes.
book, come,
Yes.
blah, 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 blah. And yet, and still, if James Baldwin were on this call in 2025, his message would not have changed from what he had to say in 1955. And that's shame on us, right? And so, what are the policies we need to put in place? You know, I understand, right, that the people who conceived the Constitution were racist. Many of them were slaveholders, right? We want something out of a document that we won't challenge, touch, or adjust that it was not designed to give us. And so what we
Yeah.
see is a half-assed democracy is a fragile democracy, right?
And that was such a well point that you said right there. We were expecting something that we were never, it was never written down to actually have. And we're just experiencing this right now. It's like you've never had this. We've never had it. It hasn't been designed for us to be thriving consistently. No, 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 you're thriving too much, girl. Slow it down, calm it down, back up. So I really love your eloquency and how you're speaking to the conversation. Let's have some true conversation about who do we have to be to continue doing the work that we're doing. And I'm not saying to change yourself, but we need to be aware of ourselves to know that doesn't work anymore. We need to do something different to actually,
Right? It already wasn't working,
it
right?
wasn't working.
In an ideal situation, um, organizations like Oliver Scholars don't need to exist,
Mhm.
right? Because there's already equity,
Yes.
diversity, and inclusion in our institutions. There's already equal opportunity. Our kids can get exactly what they need socially, educationally, uh, uh, spiritually in the places where they already exist,
Mhm.
right? I would say our mission is just as significant and important today as it was in 1984 when the organization was founded, right? The work hasn't shifted in monumental ways because the there's been virtually no movement. In fact,
Mhm.
there's data to suggest that the achievement gap was all but closed in 1986. And now we're almost back to where we were when they first enacted Brown versus Board of Ed. So that's the other thing. You know, we have someone who is loudly proclaiming their values, right? For better or for worse. But there are a lot of people on both sides of this aisle who have supported and enacted policies that have been just as harmful to our communities. But because they weren't, on TV writing executive orders, we're lulled into this idea that we had allies when we didn't really have allies in high places.
Yeah.
Um, so should we be afraid right now? Yeah. This, the political is personal. I think I don't see, unless you're a rich white male billionaire, this is going to have consequences,
Yes.
right? White women actually have been the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, not
Yeah.
Black people, not Latinx people, not our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. White women have been the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, which is now, you know, they are more educated than white men in this moment. There's definitely a disruption uh, in a fissure, a fracture that we're seeing in the fabric of the identity that we pretended to have that is causing all of us to kind of confront ourselves. And then I
Mhm.
think there's this basic human um, thing. I started reading about the beloved community, which is an idea that was not created by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but certainly one that was popularized by him. And it talks about basic human dignity and decency, right? I don't need to be an immigrant to understand that people deserve to be treated humanely. I don't need to be a trans young person in order to believe that trans young people don't deserve to be murdered. I don't need to live in public housing to believe that the people who live in public housing deserve hot water and heat during the winter, right? That is um, that's part of my notion of human decency. And so what we're seeing is people voted against other people not understanding that when I dehumanize you, I am also dehumanizing myself. And so this is going to be a really painful um, lesson, I think, for all of us. Um, uh, and so I think we're listening.
Yeah.
I think we won't have a choice but to listen and really go inward and think about our values.
Mhm.
I saw a meme on social media um, that quoted some of what Jesus said about, you know, our commitments to those who are less fortunate than us. And like it was very clear. It's the mandate is actually very clear if you are a believer. Um, and someone replied, you know, where'd you get this lefty, bull crap, right? And it's just like, but you purport to live your life according to those values. Um, I'm, what does it mean to be part of a society? This idea that government should do nothing for its people, then what does it mean to be an American? What are the rights, responsibilities, privileges, commitments, and promise of what it means to be an American if, at a very basic level, we don't want to ensure that people's basic needs are met?
So I would like to, as we come to a close, what what could you advise our emerging leaders about how to develop their leadership with emotional intelligence to take on what we're facing, our challenge, this challenge that we're facing today?
Well, I don't know if there's a special message for emerging leaders because, you know, sometimes you just got to learn by experience, right? Um, but I think, you know, take care of yourself, right? Put on your oxygen mask before you try to help other people. Um, but go all in.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You know what I'm saying? Go, go,
That's what I'm talking about.
go
That's
all
what makes
in.
you a leader. Go
Right.
all in, but handle yourself. You can't go all in if you don't have it all in alignment, clarity, what is your values, what's your passion, where do you want to make a difference? You brought up all of those elements at the beginning
How would I know what you care about by watching you?
by watching you. What really matters to you?
But how would I know that that matters to you? By your behavior, by the
Mhm.
way you conduct yourself in meetings, by the way you show up for young people. Um, let's stop pontificating
Mhm.
and really use our lives as a demonstration of our values. Otherwise, your value, it's kind of like we talked about at our retreat, right? Your core values can be the thing that you put up on the wall and never revisit, or you can really explore how to integrate those core values in every aspect of the work of your life. You know what I'm saying? I want to talk to my parents the same way I would talk to my board chair, right? I want to use power with as opposed to power over, right? That's not the model, right? Mr. Crab had all the power. I don't want to be Mr. Crab. I don't have to be Mr. Crab. I have my mother's example. I have both of my grandmother's example. I have Eileen O'Connor's example. Understated. I didn't hear her barking, bitching, moaning. You know what I'm saying? But she did have a way of saying, this is what it is, right? She said, you know what? You're a leader. I want you to do this. I said, okay.
Yeah.
Even if in my head I was like, what is she talking about? This lady is crazy. I'm not a leader. I'm 14, I'm 15, I'm 16,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But that also demonstrates like the power of our words. Use your words responsibly.
Mhm.
Watch what you say to people. People
Watch my tone.
remember, people carry your words as part of their stories.
Mhm.
Um, Even if you don't hit the mark, right? I used to have this conversation with my young people when I led another youth organization. And, high school boys can be goofy. So I said, let me talk to you um, as the man that I know you're going to become.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm not going to talk to you as the
Yes.
fool that you're acting
That you're at,
in
mhm,
this
that
moment.
you're showing up as.
Um, and there's some dignity in that. I'm going to extend dignity even if I don't see you blossoming in your full. This is how kids get lost in the middle
Yes.
because there are a lot of winning lottery tickets in the middle
Mhm.
and nobody is planting a seed. I used to, when I was teaching, every kid in my class started the class semester with an A.
There
And
you
I
go.
would call them up to my desk and I would say, I want you to look in this grade book and I want you to see that that's your name and that's an A right next to your name. Now, it's up to you whether or not you keep it at that level, right? I'm handing the baton off to you, but I'm also demonstrating to you what I think is possible for you, what I see in you, what your potential is. Some of my kids were like, yo, let me tell you something, Miss Moss. That was my only A all year, right?
But I kept it.
But for that one day,
Yeah.
you had an A. I used to have a student of the week, and I remember, shout out to Raheem, if he's on here, right? Raheem was a special, special young man, but I'm so glad about the man that he's become. And he got student of the week, and you got a button, you were acknowledged at a weekly assembly, and some of the girls are like, now, Miss Morse, that was a stretch. And I said, you know what? On Tuesday, October, whatever it was, Raheem sat still for an entire lesson.
Mhm.
And I know what it took for him to work to get to that point. And you know what? And he still, in his 40s, remembers
Yes.
that he carried that with him, that the time that I did something right, that one day that week, I was seen,
Yeah.
and do that at work, do that with your staff. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? I have one-on-one meetings with everybody in my organization at least once a year. And I tell the staff, uh, this is your agenda. I'm going to be uh, your audience, and we can talk about the work. We can talk
Mhm.
about your plans for grad school. We can talk about your professional aspirations. I had somebody last year who was having a really stressful week, and she said, you know what? I don't want to talk about my job today.
There
So
you
we
go.
talked about her son. We talked about her growing up in the Caribbean. right? And in that moment, I hope that she felt seen.
Yeah,
And we can do that.
we can do that. We can. You are one powerhouse. I am so glad that we are just jump starting this conversation. Some real talk here, some real talk. We need to continue to keep talking.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about it and let's be in action. And that's the one thing that I took away from you. Not only understanding that it starts with ourselves. You're very clear on you want to do something. Well, what matters to you? What's important to you? Let me see you in action about it. That's creating yourself as a leader and consciously developing your own self awareness and your self management that requires, you being responsible for yourself. We can't do for our young people if we can't do for ourselves. Put that mask on yourself, take care of yourself, but be in action. Be in action for the cause that you're up to. If you're not sure what your purpose is, go out there and experiment, read a book, go and volunteer, go and do something to get you inspired about something.
Okay, shameless plug right before we go, right?
Go.
Hear about education, come volunteer or donate to Oliver Scholars. If you
Yes.
are concerned about the future of women's rights, visit the website for the New York Women's Foundation. Um, our grantee partners are doing some powerful work. We need volunteers. We need board members. We need people to get engaged. And the same for Everyday Democracy. Um, we have to understand democracy before we save democracy, before we reimagine democracy. So get plugged in to the civic engagement opportunities at Everyday Democracy. And whatever your causes are, right? Let me see who you are by what you're doing with your life.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Thank you so
I
much.
am totally moved and honored to be in your presence. And
Likewise.
yes, let's keep walking and with
And talking. We're
poise
gonna walk that talk.
and power to demonstrate leadership as it should be in action. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.